Well, good afternoon. Now it's 3:30. We resume today's agenda, our second uh, 2020 Localization Congress. Now we've come to the last session of the day. Welcome and thank you for staying around in our rooms full of interest, proposals, and people interested in this topic. Those of you following online, again, welcome and thank you for staying. We've got three simultaneous meetings. It's a rich agenda. The topics are very interesting. That's why we are in three different rooms at the same time, talking about the Big Bergen, room two, where we have this localization timeline with everyone's contribution, and then I'm sorry, that's room one. Then room two, we look at territorial localization for humanitarian response in food production. Okay, we start our fifth and last meeting today. Everything that this multi-stakeholder event means or session, the panelists are willing to speak. They're here, ready to participate. I want to give a special welcome to Carolina Perdomo from CID, Bárbara Batista from OCHA. Thank you for being here, Florian Stodolny, HEKS-EPER, Venezuela, Colombia, and finally Jeanette Rincón from Cáritas, Venezuela. And the moderator, well, we have the pleasure to have Carlos Moreno from SNPS, Cáritas, Colombia. I'd like Carlos to introduce the panelists, introduce the topic of the last session, and it's going to look into gaps, challenges, and strategies. Carlos, you have to make the mission to close a day that's been full of experiences, knowledge, exchange, challenges, but especially hope and opportunities to restate humanitarian assistance. Welcome. Thank you, Diana, and everyone for being here in this hall to talk about the multi-stakeholder analysis of humanitarian localization gaps, challenges, and implementation strategies. The framework today is a conversation with four experts. Janet on my left, she coordinates the Socio-Anthropological Observatory of the Episcopal Latin American Council in Latin America and the Caribbean. Jeanette holds a master's degree in medical studies specialist in epidemiology, and also she plays a role to accompany Caritas Venezuela as a consultant. She's held different experiences, and that's allowed her for her to write and on experience of localization and then region. Carolina Perdomo, director from the Peace and Development Organization. She has a bachelor's degree in pedagogic psychology, magister in social inclusion, over 20 years in the humanitarian sector, especially looking at protection, education, and to defend human rights. She's finally played a big role leading localization and strengthening humanitarian and local stakeholders in Colombia. Florian, humanitarian coordinator of HEKS-EPER in Colombia. He's a specialist in IHL, also in conflict resolution and peace. He's got diverse experience in Colombia, Venezuela, and other countries. Bárbara Batista, joint representative of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA. Bárbara has a bachelor's degree in anthropology. She holds over 20-year experience and leading humanitarian and coordinator humanitarian response not only in Colombia and Latin America but also in other continents such as Asia and Africa. This meeting, as you see, is fed by experiences, knowledge, very wide knowledge, which will allow us to consolidate three specific points on challenges. They are gaps, challenges, and implementation strategies. Now, to open and with the first question, I'd like to remind you of the Global Compact. Since 2016, the organizations, donors, everyone committed to giving 25% or make sure that 25% of the funding would go to local and national organizations in the most direct manner. The last report by this organization says that by 2024, and I mean October, we had not reached more than 5%. in funding or financing. Given this openness, we're going to start with the first question. It's 4 minutes per person. Each expert will answer this question. We want to know specifically what challenges humanitarian actors face both locally and nationally in the area of sustainability access, quality access to funding. I don't know who would like to start. Barbara? All right, let me see. I'm going to start because since OCHA has some sort of global panorama, of course, on a global overview, we see Carolina, she leads our group on localization. She also has this global view on the situation of funding for local and national organizations in Colombia. First, I wanted to show, because this is localization Congress of Humanitarian Action, Localization, Latin America, and the Caribbean. I want to highlight the progress of Colombia in the last 2 or 3 years about localization. And it's opened, let's call it the access to funding, national, local organization by establishing a humanitarian fund here in Colombia. Something that started being implemented last year, and it shows the need to see localization as a strategic element. This fund only funds local and national organizations. It's different from other funds in other countries where, okay, there's a percentage, but it's not the whole thing. And it's a fund that's got a component to train, to guide, to accompany these organizations, regardless of having identified organizations with some quality, high quality, that have made them eligible. We have a pool, we've started with 23, but we're talking about 40 something, right? So these marks the direction where we are going and the way that we need to articulate with other potential donors. And it's not just accessing the funds, but how. Because the fact that there isn't much access to funding is precisely because of some criteria that are absolutely strict, almost unreachable. I mean, they're not realistic. We need to review the eligibility criteria and adapt them to the conditions and specialities or particulars of each country and make all these procedures more flexible so that the local and national organizations may have more chances. Because, funding there may be, but the criteria are so crazy that it's very hard to comply, to fulfill them. So the localization group has done interesting work to identify the challenges of the organization for funding. And okay, we are working as part of our localization strategy to see how we could impact, influence donors and agencies funding to be more coherent and more flexible according to the capabilities and the reality of their organizations. That's as far as I would go. Thank you. Okay, along the same line as Barbara, I can mention 4 points that I believe are part of the challenges that we organizations face locally when we think about sustainability in relation to funding. One, as Barbara mentioned, I don't want to repeat, is the requirements. How these requirements interfere the organizational capacity that we have, the local NGOs and national NGOs have. But there are another three elements that are key turn into a challenge and a limitation for organizations, and it's the cost effectiveness. How, when we put projects together, we need to show very high indicators so that they may be effective in the use of resources. So let's say 5,000 participants with per capita per participant minimum per capita. So the operation is not really humanitarian. And the work teams in the territories, they have to carry out mass actions. In the end, they limit the direct actions. So I think that's an important point. The other thing is the their own contributions. Local organizations, we do not only apply to international funding, we also look for national resources established according to a Colombian standard. They ask that we provide the counter, let's say, contribution, and sometimes NGOs and nonprofit organizations, they cannot have these resources. We need to continue to assess the know-how, the experience that the organizations have and quantify that. How much that costs, how much is that in resources to quantify the experiences that we bring in. Let's say 10, 19, 6 years, some years, the expertise that we have accumulated in different sectors. The other thing has to do with the local organizations. We are under a special regime, but more and more we are being limited by the legal provisions in Colombia about taxation, also human talent, the Ministry of Labor, and it's limiting. And this is human talent that is not considered in the projects, and definitely it limits, I insist, and they turn into this funding challenge for the local organizations. That's it. Greetings from Jeanette Marcus, the director of Cáritas. Unfortunately, she could not join us. Well, first of all, I want to support what Bárbara said. I want to second what she said about the wide call we have experienced in Venezuela, where OCHA has expanded the call for national organizations to participate in the humanitarian architecture. We're working with Cáritas. We have at least 6 or 7 representatives in each cluster, plus the work groups. They are cross-cutting and they are part of the review committees, the Venezuelan Humanitarian Fund. So we are gaining presence and space, and that empowers us. And we're eligible and more eligible organizations. Also, what Carolina said, maybe the requirements, because we don't know, that could cause some harm, do some harm. We need to look into that, and always along this line of accountability that applies not only for this but for many other things, to build, to co-create the projects. When we put the logical framework together, we should do this together. And then, more than access to funds, is that if we start from the fact that, as a matter of fact, there's been progress in granting funding directly to the local organizations, sometimes we see how there is an overlap of the, let's say, funding capture, and sometimes there's an unloyal competition. And we look at things such as, what is a local organization? Is it an international one that becomes legalized in the country and they open an office and they find resources? So this thing to us has caused, not just at Caritas Nacional, but also Caritas Venezuela has continental leadership and regional leadership. We're in charge of the Bolivar region. We held a meeting at the end of last year here in Bogota as well. And as agreement, we said, okay, what do we understand by local organization? It's not only to have a legal name. It's not enough to be present in the field, but to have a leadership foundation, to have a platform with the people who will tell us, look, our actions are sustainable because we are there with our people, legitimacy, and right support from the community.
This was an issue I wanted to share with you. Then there are other topics that go along with financing, indirect costs, overhead, Sometimes, well, they don't inform because of lack of trust or they don't want to make noise, but we would like to empower the power of information, and we need to know what's happening and how this is being distributed, because we all have all indirect costs and we need to assume co-responsibly the risks projects impose, and we need to be prepared for that, because it's not like the project risks I need to be assumed just on one side or just local ones. The overhead is with the international ones. But if something happens with the project, everyone has to be assumed by the local partner. That's it. Well, salary gaps. This is probably something very small, punctual, but impacts project sustainability. We have high rotation, staff. We need to unify criteria in those terms as well. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation and to discuss with people like you. I'd like to go back to progress mentioned by Bárbara. So we see progress, but we see that there is progress in perception. The importance, we need that change, we do have it, and that sector that is not so many years, well, this has been something there. But what we see from my standpoint is that we have this expectation that local is adapted to system and not that the system adapts to local. And there have been so many problems. For example, the requirements that we mentioned that are not reachable. What does it mean? Well, if we have that system, partners we look for are small copies of ourselves, because they need similar departments, they need to fill out the same format, they need to correspond to the same methodologies. So we just need to copy and paste to a certain level, and we make a mistake. So on the one hand, we have capacities, knowledge, ancestral knowledge that exists in those territories, and we do not keep it in mind. Okay, I always say, how can we do this better? Probably a little bit more trust. That'd be good. I've already chosen a local partner, and I do it based on the trust that exists. So, how do you say this? Something that can govern that relationship, proportional control, because I cannot control everything. Each cent that is spent on the field, I don't get there. Well, there are a lot of problems born by local partners. We need to look at financing mechanisms, because what we do is we finance based on projects 6 months, 9 months. There's not stability towards the future. For an international NGO, that's something that affects everyone. And we think about freer funds, multi-annual funds. They can develop their own strategies. Creativity that stimulates all those things, because we move so much in a very fixed structure, projects, methodology, so on. This is the report, the indicator. As long as report indicators look good, everyone is happy, and that's a small design mistake. Something important is having access to donor. We have a very interesting example, a humanitarian fund, and they took that step. We're not going to go with the NGO. I go directly with the local partner. If I work directly with local partners, I have this unique access to donors. And this gives me very important power as to what's going to happen. And if there are problems in the project, what do? Well, there is this local partner that doesn't work very well, because I'm afraid that I lose my financing, my positioning with that donor I worked for so long. Something very interesting as well when we talk about localization, we talk about NGOs that match certain criteria, and we leave out civil society, installed capacities in communities, because those structures will never have the capacity to move to international project. Never. That's not going to happen. And as the last point, I wanted to tell you in financing, I think that there is this way that both international NGOs but local NGOs, they can diversify their sources of income. They don't always have to depend on the money that is coming from abroad. I need to have consultancies for major offices having tourist offers, but that income can be reinvested in my social partnership. This conjuncture that we have right now, I need to look at my sources of income. Florian, thank you so much for the answer, and all the panelists as well. If we have access to multilateral or multi-donor funds, as Barbara mentioned, there are some points that we need to touch on, and some of them are the flexibility, access criteria, and recognition, and these type of competitors that those that compete under the wrong, illegally. Local knowledge management is another point. This is the added value that international cooperation has. This is what all experts have mentioned. How that counterpart, the counterpart that is non-financial, how it is recognized, the knowledge organizations have so that they can access to different levels of resources. We recognize that financial resources are important, but there are also important pillars to get to activities local organizations, national organizations have. The strategies, the actions that bring humanitarian coordination leadership. That's the next question. How can we guarantee positioning towards leadership where local humanitarian, national humanitarian organizations are leaders? This is very interesting. I think that in Colombia, since we started implementing the flagship initiative, well, localization, you have mentioned the bargain agreement, we wanted that to be a reality because it's true that it's been years and years talking, but we haven't been able to see tangible resources, the tangible results of implementation. Anyway, flagship implementation has provided the opportunity of working on that topic. The humanitarian team, the country team in Colombia, developed a localization strategy, and they are applying that strategy, led by the localization group, led by SEED and the Apoyar organization. Oh, they're there, right there. And one of the key things that we see if we pay attention to the crisis we're in right now, unfortunately, many of those present here are suffering in their own institutions and organizations. It gives us an opportunity so that localization is real. So we are now going through a phase. It's not just about the achievements when implementing localization, and we have 3 local organizations that are leading coordination local teams in the territory, but we're also mapping all of these organizations so that they become visible in a platform that is being created. This platform generates or brings, you, Jeanette, talked about information. We are generating information mechanisms amongst organizations so that they can access information and they know what it is about, what all this topic is about. We're obviously participating in training. We're training these organizations so that they participate actively as coordination local teams and the humanitarian country team and the advisory board as well, where local organizations are the majority. in terms of proportionality. Of course, we have other participants, but there are more local and national organizations than international organizations. And they are present there in the planning. We have increased participation of local and national organizations in our response plan. We have identified priorities, community priorities, and we have presented our projects. That's a response plan. All of these are achievements in the past years. Just as I mentioned, the crisis we're in, this makes it more relevant and it makes it more strategic for us to go for localization, foster it, and we can advance in a quicker manner towards a strategy, restructuring coordination at the territorial level. Well, we have to go in because we're losing capacity and we need to rethink ourselves. So here, the option of local organizations to lead teams, to manage information, this is a reality, and we're going to start working now. And I just wanted to leave it there. Thank you. I think that to guarantee leadership in local organizations, talking about humanitarian coordination, it would work as a recipe that has ingredients. The first ingredient, the most important ingredient, would be to believe in local organizations. I think that we need to cancel those myths that we have in our head that local organizations cannot do it, or that we are biased, or that we are facing politics or the context of Colombia, and that limits a lot to be able to be trained, to be certified in the essential minimum standards, so to be able to access to many actions from these subnational spaces, participation, leadership of those spaces. So I think that the main ingredient is to believe in local organizations. Second ingredient, financing. We do need resources. Local organizations, we need resources to be able to participate and to be at ease in those coordination spaces. Of course, we can do it, and we have evidenced or seen actions, just as Barbara pointed out. There are local organizations that are leading and co-leading spaces, local coordination teams. They take the flag, they are the protagonists in these actions. But resources are needed so that for the quality of those professionals, so that they don't have to take on different roles. Third ingredient, training. We need to train people. We foster capacity strengthening, and we talk about sharing capacities because local organizations are not born from scratch. However, we need to make those contents meet the language, the discourse, the capacities, the speech, the contexts that we organizations have, those who are in the territory, in the field. Now we would have two big results after looking at the ingredients. Then how we have the coordination at the national level, how there is a space in the country team, just not because they belong to platforms and they take us to organizations just to be there, but there should be a space in the humanitarian team for local organizations, not because they're in the forum or in the alliance, no, but because we actually have that space and continue belonging to different sectors, the cluster that exists in our humanitarian action. At the subnational level, how we keep in mind the TORs. They give the opportunity for local organizations to go in. So we are facing this crisis, this situation. We are looking at local organizations. Now we will be able to see those organizations. We will be able to coordinate, co-lead spaces in subnational spaces. So right now we don't have resources. So it is important. It is important to see this. This is opening a door and is to reinvent, to rethink, and to continue having a potential for the coordination from the territory, so for what's national, for the national level. I agree again. I agree with you. Just like I told you before, the changes made by OCHA, they have been able, but we've been able to access to advocacy spaces, humanitarian coordination clusters have turned into schools from some organizations, other organizations, the weakest, those that are still learning from others. So I think that these are spaces, valuable spaces, so that we can expand all this topic and we delve into localization. Carolina said, trust. Trust that we can learn, that local organizations can learn technically, narrative, a way of acting in those spaces and make ourselves visible in those advocacy spaces. So this, what we work is the introduce, the English word, introduce ourselves into those spaces. We have had valuable experiences. One is in the midst of all conflicts and tensions, OCHA has opened those spaces and they let us build bridges. We hope that they are long lasting so that we can have a sustainable action throughout time. CRS, through the Empower program, they opened a door that doesn't only strengthen our advocacy capacity, but to be able to get close to these international spaces. So they take a step back and they say, this is local, speak with local ones. This is very important to us. Then, to share lessons learned. And there is this part, local ones. We need, to be, in the case of Venezuela, Diana's here, this humanitarian platform, they let us organize ourselves because humanitarian aid will come out at any point in time. There is this decrease at the fund. What's going to happen later? What's going to happen with the coordination when these leaves? How do we make it sustainable? We need to strengthen in our local networks to be able to guarantee permanence. Something not minor, the present in our spaces, that has come up in meetings, language. Language as a limitation, an excluding factor to be able to guarantee local leadership and humanitarian coordination in some spaces. There are a lot of technologies now and possibilities for that limitation or the exclusion factor can be overcome by everyone. I would like to contribute with the fact that nowadays we have coordination spaces and we have the protocols and the ways of working, what's local. We have ancestral knowledge, the way of working that probably for people in Europe or the US is not so evident firsthand. What calls my attention is that I studied there in Europe, in Germany, and I can participate here in Colombia. It's the same logics. There is no difference. The protocol, so on. And one asks yourself, culturally, isn't there something else that we can keep in mind through a different approach, is what I mean? So I see there that they copy and paste a lot. So there is co-leadership in the clusters. That's a good practice that needs to be delved into. While those coordination spaces are in the same logics, then progress is not going to be very significant. We need to rethink the flagship initiative that we have at OCHA. This is a space in the right direction. How we can achieve constant training, because this local partner, this visibility, some workshops in a project that are paid, but it's just a mentoring process. This is turnover, so different commitment long term, because nobody is going to advance with this partnership, a 1 year partnership. So it's just a year is just enough time to get to know one another. Something that called my attention is salaries that Jeanette mentioned. That was a point I had reflected on before here. So what happens is that we have three levels. We have very high up, we have NGOs, we have the civil society, and this adds up. So what is the aspiration? So they want to be in an international agency, very well paid, and this is understandable because this is the operation of human beings to ensure that you're okay in terms of money.
Probably a 500,000 difference and a change of an NGO has done good work, but you go to an international NGO that has or does the same work in the same area and they pay twice as much. So, what to do is a difficult question. A lot of people are looking up to that. And what does that mean to for let's say leaders that lead local organization? They're always afraid of this leak of talent. Okay, I think we also need to take into account structural investment. We need to talk about overhead costs, that kind of thing, because how can we have the expectation that local stakeholder can be sustained throughout time unless you make the structural investment? I only pay the staff and there's a little bit of transportation and that's it. But how that stakeholder should have resources at hand for their own sustainability, for their own ideas, and so on. I think there are things to more things to consider. I also think that at the local level, we all can always look for our own coordination initiatives. We should not wait until someone comes to explain what the world is like. I think there's a lot of potential to organize things locally, create new coordination spaces, and so on. And it caught my attention something they said about helping one another, share resources, and so on. I think there's big potential. In English, the word is twinning, like peer work between local NGOs if they can convey knowledge from one another and then they can scale it up and have a greater scope. And at the end of the day, what we always need is to measure. Well, we need indicators in localization leadership. How can we measure that it's taking place and that it's with good quality? Over. This year, 2025, has shown crisis. We have displacement crisis, also the financial contraction, which is something that we've been talking about, the humanitarian conjuncture. Not only Latin America and the Caribbean have been impacted, but there's a worldly thing. So we recognize that again, in this big global compact that took place in 2016, there are new challenges, and that's what we've been talking about. There are challenges about the financial, let's say, reduction. So we have a third question about this, and it's what should be the principle or strategy that we should take into account in humanitarian action to guarantee the response and the sustainability to these local stakeholders, national stakeholders, in the framework of the situation we're going through. Well, all the topics we've discussed before set the foundations for sustainability. What is clear is that localization is the future. These funding restrictions, well, means they're going to continue. It's not a current, ongoing, sudden situation, but it's the future. So we must guarantee sustainability and work with local stakeholders, not only local organizations and national organizations, but also communities, civil society, and even institutions. I mean, this is something that we need to work on at all levels, and some of us will work to strengthen those levels. I think, as Carolina put it, we need funding. Unfortunately, we do not have funds, but we need funds to invest on localization. I think they are installed capacities. The first thing we need to do is look at that capacity. There are organizations that are already working and they have a lot of experience, and we need to learn from that to better guide our training, the extra training or the capacity strengthening. We're not starting from scratch. We need to realize what's already there and everything that's been done. This Congress has been held. Look, this is the second one. I think I was present in the first one, and that shows the reality. They are very powerful organizations. Civil society is very strong, especially in this region, Latin America and the Caribbean. So we need to work on what we've got and strengthen it. And I believe this is something we need to raise awareness on at all levels, not only here in a country such as Colombia with all the stakeholders, but also globally. I mean, this is the direction we're going to take because the idea is that through this localization and little by little, we strengthen tools, we provide tools, we build resilience, and we guarantee that these local responses are stronger and stronger, and they'll depend less on international assistance because in the end, that's what we are seeking, that we won't be needed because the institutions that are the first responsible parties for the humanitarian response, but also the stakeholders that are first responders, because when there's a crisis, the first to respond is the community, then the grassroots organizations and local organizations that are present there. So, with all of this in mind, I think we need to work on all the lines that we've already mentioned, the previous responses, the questions you've asked, and that's as far as I go. Thank you. I completely agree with Barbara. I think the response is to work as a network with partnerships, consortiums, some regional views, and I'd like to talk to you about the experience of the work group on localization. Over 150 organizations, over a year and a half, getting together with a work plan, with a view, strengthening capabilities, agreeing on discourses, recognizing the territorial and national dialogues to promote visibility, coordination, the funding needs, but also the need to strengthen our own capacities to learn, to be more uh, competitive, and be more trained to give a response. I think what the localization work group has achieved is to have a comprehensive view. We've recognized ourselves and organizations in the humanitarian action, but also agencies that work on development. We don't start from this line and we only look at this, but we are born to help, to assist, and be humanitarian. And we need to continue to strengthen, and we continue to strengthen our comprehensive view and not in sectors. So to say this is health, education, no, we need to work everywhere. And the response, that's why the actions of the local organizations, and we're not to say that we're first respondents while we get to with a temporal, let's say, idea. For example, we've already enabled shelters for women and children where there is first psychological assistance. So I think these are the big takeaways. Something that we have achieved as the localization work group. It's something that we can recognize in the framework and that we've kept it. So time with the right conditions to validate and to recognize all of this, for example, together near also from the proposals from the international organizations. It's all part of the work group on localization. So I believe that this is leading us to think and think about the integrality of the humanitarian response. We consider this as principles: transcendence, co-creation, identity. So the international organizations are there for as long as they need it. The idea is to return the property of the ideas and processes, the local knowledge, and not to go beyond that. Then integral and transcendence commit to localization more than financial and legal terms. Think about the future impact, and you need patience for that. You need human processes to go beyond the procedure, the standard, or technique. And then along that same line, the co-creation. Instead of imposing management models or monitoring, or even organizational structures or with whom you're going to ally and co-create. It's very hard to hear her. She's not holding the microphone right. The principle of identity to value. Identity is the biggest patrimony. Local organizations, when we want to access these spaces, because that's our strength. And then flexibility. I'm sorry, I can't hear it because she's not holding. Is the process under development. We need to go step by step. So it's a call to church to walk together with patience, knowing that maybe we'll need multi-year projects. Again, she's moved the microphone away. As opposed, she's talking like this. I can't hear what she's saying. We need to start with our own encounters and see if we have that freedom and we're willing to meet others. It was very hard to hear. I'm sorry she was not holding the microphone properly. Maybe a short reflection. At the end of the day, everything about localization, humanitarian assistance is something that should be developed within the framework, even of the donors. It's not that we talk and everyone says, yes, we've got the power and control of the resources, and then they'll let go. There are also interests there. But I think step by step, there are ways that bring all stakeholders together. And there'll be more control and more power because with each dollar, each peso that other institution sends, we let go of our control, and that's a reality we must keep in mind. I agree with continuing to strengthen the institutions. We need to be based on mutual agreements and mutual learning, not to come with prefabricated and pre-manufactured concepts. We need to rethink based on what we find along the way, and we need a long-term commitment. It cannot be something you achieve in 1 or 2 years. And another point that is really important that we must guarantee healthy growth for local stakeholders. We see this in many contexts. A local stakeholder that answers weeks later, but we overload them with more projects and so on. But then they are out of projects and they have to fire 50 people. And we need to market diversification as a consequence. More than 40 organizations and so on. It's a very important step. In a few years, we may talk about 150 or 200 organizations, and we have more penetration in civil society because there are many capacities. There's a lot of potential that we are not looking into yet. As principles, to answer the question properly, I like what Janet said. I took note of that. And let's see where decisions are made. Decisions need to be made in a branch in Europe? No, they need to be made in Bogota. I'm not so sure. We're coming closer, but we need to see where decisions are made and who can make decisions. We need a local design. I speak to colleagues and say, okay, did you translate the document to Spanish? Because it was in English. What do? We take things from somewhere else. Anyway, flexibility. I think it's very important as part of the institutions that lead that relation or some circumstances. We need flexibility. And again, the need to extend the mechanisms to civil society. That's something that I've learned here in Colombia. If you go to a neighborhood or anywhere, there's always an organization. There's something that's there, and they're hoping that they'll have it. But we still need a long way to go because it's not just copy paste. We need to have a perception change and change the way we work. Thank you. Well, the four of you, thank you. Thank you for sharing the experiences and answer the questions. We have time for questions from the audience, exact questions. Otherwise, we can conclude today's session. Hello, Evelyn Costa, an organization of indigenous women north of Colombia, the Guayu Women. Thank you, because we finally opened this space, especially in this hall. We are open to conversation. I want to talk about something that our German friend said, how we repeat things that are still from Germany and we repeat them in Colombia. We need to start with these events because it's good to have a conversation that starts here. It'd be interesting if in these panels you bring part of the civil society in, the grassroots organizations, so that we talk about our experience, what we've learned, what's been interesting, what we must say, because we see that throughout the day, I don't know what the first Congress was like, but hopefully for a third one, you can change the methodology and make it more participatory. As indigenous peoples, we don't see things as peace, development, humanity. We need to take it all together, and especially as women. And we talk about a system of care, and we are more volunteers, and we don't have the human talent to take care of our loads. And when the German friend said that we need to look at the work of the grassroots organizations, yeah, that's right. We need to bring it here. And I'm saying this respectfully, not just to listen to the um, speech of the organizations. I belong to an organization of indigenous women, and we need to use our last name as strategy. First last name or women. So we are ministers. Okay. Unless we call ourselves ministers, then we can for a strategic alliance. Okay. And then we need to ask what feminism is for indigenous organizations and indigenous peoples now, the humanitarian component. I realize that you need to be certified, that there's a strategy, that we need to investigate or search what that means. And then the challenge. Well, we are indigenous populations. We're open to find it, yeah, but when you read, does it that you have a PA policy and a corruption policy? Learn English, those forms you don't understand, some technicalities. It's not easy. So with all humbleness, I ask that you make these meetings more participatory. We listen to organizations more and learn from them. Of course, maybe three parties, four parties where we have the system, the organization, the big NGOs, those of us that have had to fight. Yeah, I've heard about the crisis and so on. It's true. And we are still there. The grassroots organizations are still there. The changes and changes. The big NGOs that make changes that we need to look at and see what we do and learn. Once an old man said that I'm worried about the so many words, the word resilience of being resilient. Why do I have to be resilient if this is my own territory? And now we have a challenge. In the end, it's the Colombian state that should guarantee our rights. They confuse the guaranteeing rights. It should be the humanitarian sector, and they don't want to understand that. First, our own things, our own struggle. Number three, understand what humanitarian means. And number four, now we invite the companies that are in the territory to respect our rights. And that's another discussion. That's it. Thank you. Hopefully, you'll take my comment into account. Thank you for the reflection. We're out of time. I think what we have now is the closure for today. We've talked about different challenges. So what we're taking with us is just a few points to go after localization, as the panelists said. for local strengthening, local knowledge management, about funding, also greater capacity in decision making and answers adapted to the needs in the territory. Diana, can you close or? Well, just one more question. Okay, maybe one more question from the audience? Two? Okay. Two more questions. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor because in the morning I wanted to say things. I'm very excited to hear Bárbara. We got 3 local organizations in front of the local organization teams, and we're thinking that we're going to walk in that direction. Here in Colombia, we've got 14 LCs and 14 humanitarian teams. They're mixed. I guess this is the fusion from GIFIN and ELSE, and we're going to move to one single team for resources. Unaudible. Okay, nice. I guess we are thinking about that too as a localization work group. But I want to launch a proposal so that you take it with you and meditate. If we still need coordinators, that means resources. We could think, I don't know, of a country project that would finance all these coordinations because the coordination is needed. And then, even though we're trying to make sure that the coordinations are led by leaders, or that they can place their resources either by a local organization to pay the coordination and through a country project, so that organizations can do this with all the discipline needed and with all the rigor that it takes.
The idea is that we manage data and we can present contexts for decision making. There is something that we have not talked about here. Thank you for passing on the mic to me because it's mental health of humanitarian workers. Good thing that we have the opportunity to coordinate a space, let's say a mixed humanitarian team. But besides all the tasks that I have as the organization director, seeing what's happening, because we are at this point, the maximum point of stress and this desperation. I don't know if in December we'll be here. We're going to lose this legal security. We need to comply with tax, legal standards, norms. We need to abide by the law in terms of labor issues. So we are going to be available, or and to all of us, and then we're gonna come back, and then we're gonna have this gigantic structure of UNHCR, IOM, and others. So the idea is that those coordinations are financed through this big project so that we can be at ease and we can do this job according to what is required. And we need to think about taking care of those who take care. Those organizations that are in every corner of the country, we need to take care of one another mutually. So we talk about a humanitarian work. We have humanized our offices. Are we taking care of our people or overburdening them? We cannot continue assuming this. So I hope that we can make it concrete as one of those things that comes out of this Congress is that possibility, the possibility of having our voice and a capacity to coordinate and have financing, because if there is no budget, coordinations will need to be paid. Okay. Hello, I'm Julie Daza. I come from El Mango village from Cauca department. I represent the local community of El Mango village. To me, it's an honor to be here and to listen to you because it is not my question. It is a suggestion. I don't know how we see it from the center to the periphery, but my municipality, Argelia, Cauca, and Department of Cauca, that every day is in the news because of different reasons, because of the armed conflict, because of the indigenous strike, because of the truck driver strikes, they need to be away from those institutions that unfortunately change every 4 years. So local governments change every 4 years, but people who are there, we are leaders that know our communities. I am a politologist and I am a specialist in government, in peace and territorial development, and I'm the president of the community organization there in this village. It is not just the mayor's office or the governor's office. I am in these spaces because I've come this way. Just it's not just getting there to the mayor's office in a municipality. You need to go beyond. You need to look for leaders, those of us who need investment and those of us that need to be made visible. It's not just accompaniment because I know there has been accompaniment. I think that, well, there is this training. I mean, with our territories, we are given trainings, but we never implement them. We're trained in. I have so many certificates, like so many, but that's as far as it goes. We are just local. They leave us identified. But to be able to have interventions, sorry, I've been there in my community government for 8 years. I've knocked on doors, and the few things that I've found is not because those that are projects, but because of the reaction to an emergency, because there is massive displacement, because there are combats, because there are deaths, and that's not the idea. The idea is to do intervention from now because the peace that we're looking for in our territories, it comes from forgiveness and to build social tissue. And that is not just based on the fact that we are here. It is in operations that you take to the territories. So from El Mango in Argelia, in Cauca, please look or look for me because I am not selfish and I need my municipality not just to be identified because of war. We are in post conflict. And since 2016 that the victims unit provides collective reparation. It's been 9 years, and so far we see that the principal park is not repaired. The hut that was bombarded was not been rebuilt. There is no psychosocial support, not support to leaders. Today, please, I apologize, but I need you to look from the center and locate there, in those places where nowadays we need more. Well, this panel and these last three interventions, those of us who have taken note, because this is collective work, we are here for that, to listen to reflections, to build better, to do more, to correct. So all of us, we've taken note so that we continue doing things with less and better, just as it was said this morning. Before ending, we invite you to look at this short video and then we'll close, not without telling Carlos, thank you for being the moderator. Thank you to panelists. Let's hear it for them. Where the Andean mountains meet with the Amazon, communities have faced challenges that test the resilience. Natural disasters, social crises, and health emergencies have struck the region. Community leaders Local organizations and volunteers have been the first to respond, but their voices have often been silenced or ignored at the global decision making. In 2023, an initiative was born aiming at changing the paradigm of humanitarian action. Thus, the Humanitarian Action Localization Congress was created. In May 2025, the historic city of Bogota is preparing to become the epicenter of the third edition of Congress. For 2 days, May 6th and 7th, local leaders, experts, and organizations will gather. This Congress is not just an event, it's a movement. It is a network of solidarity with each represents a reality, a story. Bogota 2025 will be remembered as a turning point. Be part of history. Localization is the future.